It's a long while since.
Hi, folks. Yep.
Yeah.
We just jump into the topic. So
Yes.
we're live right now.
Oh, we're live. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
Yes.
we're live. Yeah,
That's fast.
we don't want to miss any of it. So, yep. Go on.
Oh, everyone's
so-
gone very shy.
Yeah.
Welcome to DevKami number, I lost count.
91.
91.
Oh, 91.
Yeah.
So I'm swimming, and who
I
else
am
is-
Tristan.
Let's start with, yes.
And we
Come on.
have
And
Andy.
Chi Leong. And
Yeah,
Wendy.
Chileong. I said it. So and we have Beholder, Mr. Beholder here.
Hello, also Dave.
Mike.
David or Dave. But been Beholder for a long time because it was my process name on the Vaxon when I was back studying computer science in university in 1985 when I first used that as a process name. Look at that, VMS, Vaxon VMS. You see, we've already gone very nerdy, which is how you people like it, right?
Yes.
In a way.
And as far as I know, none of us other than you actually use a VEX. And more interestingly, I don't think only few of us actually heard of a VEX.
I'm
Well,
not even
That's
born
so
yet.
good.
It is back in the day, of course, university students like me doing computer science worked through the night because mainframes worked faster at night when fewer people were using them. And the VAX was one of they were very popular mainframes in the UK because Digital, who made them, had the smart idea of making sure that all graduates learnt computer science on VAX so that they would then go into the workplace telling everyone how good these machines were. It hasn't worked for them, as you know, but because I don't think any of you are using VAX VMS now. But oh my God, it was great. It had an unusual thing in those days that file names were 8.3, which you're familiar with, semicolon, and then a version number. So that every time you saved the file, the version number went up. So bizarrely, given how late to the game a lot of young modern people are to version control, actually VMS was doing that in the file system in the early days. You could go up to 32768 was the maximum file number, which computer scientists amongst you will recognize as a number. Anyway, this isn't, I know that's not what we're here to talk about.
No, I'm interested. What happens when you overflow the file?
You couldn't save the file. You couldn't save the file.
Oh.
So look, if we
anyone?
Look, we'll do tape is in a minute now, but because you've asked me, there used to be a thing, the login.com was the file that ran when you logged in on VMS, right? So which was like your what was it, command.bat, I think, on Windows or something. But anyway,
Command.com, yeah.
Command.com, right, okay. So if you were a bad person and you got access to somebody's account, which of course is what goes on when you're at university, what you would do is write your own.
I'm gonna focus on
You'd write your own process that when somebody logs in, they would inadvertently run the script you'd left them, and the last thing your script would do would hide itself, redefine the directory command so it wouldn't show itself, and then redefine logout to rename your file back into login.com with a version number one more than theirs when you'd finished. Anyway, you did all this, and the way that you prevented it was that you made sure your own login.com was set to 32768 as its version number so that nobody could save a file higher above it to stop that happening. So what a sad thing to have in my head. But that's the kind of knowledge that I've got stuck in my head from
That's
this.
like that's a hacky way of setting something to read only.
Yes,
So
yes.
it
was like the idea that there is the edge of the world and you can't have a version beyond that is actually rather beautiful, right?
Yes. Interestingly, yes.
Yep,
So
reviews.
right. Sorry, I don't think, because I know. Are we being honest about the fact that I do know some of you already outside of the context of tape is? I don't feel that naughty about going too dev nerdy on you because I know that's really what you're here for.
No, it's fine. Nerdy is what we do.
Yes.
Yeah,
Even
fine
though
with me.
I've been trying to say that we should go to the soft side of technology, but anything goes today. Anything goes.
You know
So
sometimes
we go
like
through our user format.
there's nothing going on.
Yeah, nothing going on. Social distancing and all that.
Well, that's affecting me because these days, right now, I'm technically employed at university, although I am on holiday this week, which is why I'm allowed to talk to you, obviously, otherwise I'd be too busy. But that's having a huge impact on universities and the relationship with teaching and technology. It's a very interesting time to be wondering about the soft side of technology because it's affecting everything.
Yes.
But, yeah. How are you? Oh yeah. How is everything over there? Are you allowed to run around outside?
We had 2 months of hard lockdown that you can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So then when the number went down until single digit, then we are allowed to roam. So
Yeah,
now
it's starting to let up now.
Yeah.
And are you wearing masks when you go out? Because I know as you know that I lived over in Thailand for years.
Yeah.
That it's nowhere near as radical to wear a mask in Southeast Asia as it is over here. People are really uncomfortable with the situation, and as technologists, we have to laugh at the fact that the police were definitely discouraging people covering their faces at protests last year, and this year, facial recognition technology is taking a back seat to the police now in fining you for not covering your face, which is wow.
It's a big change. Well, now we just have a bunch of thermometers pointing at us. I suspect some of those are actually random number generators.
Of course, and of course, you already sadly have experienced this because I travelled on your side of the planet when SARS was a thing. So you're used to already measuring people coming into airports. The whole thing is alien to the cold West.
Yes. So since it's your show, Wendy, you should take over before we take it for far too long.
Yes, I'm very sorry that we went off.
Before we hijacked.
And Dave, before you start, do you notice the logo is actually designed by Wendy?
Oh yes, no, I realised that. It's fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous.
And it's the old logo, so she did it.
Hey, you have that. Hey, I'm looking for that. Can I have that? I totally lost my own.
And there's a durian instead of an apple.
Okay, nice. The king of fruits.
So and we basically Tapir is the mascot of our tech community over here. I mean, we try to. So
any community that has a tapir as its mascot is already twice as good as all the others. It's
So
and
I'm
the one at
show
the website,
the comic strip.
Well, actually, the one in the website I just wanted to point out is actually animated with blinking eyes and moving legs. So if you
Wendy,
go to DevKami.com, it's quite cool.
Wendy, what did you do that in? What's your tech?
For this logo, I used Affinity Design. But the one before what did I use? I think I used Figma.
I get to show you this. Wendy also designed an animated logo for us in CSS.
Yes.
Oh wow.
Yes, the whole thing is in CSS. Yeah.
Which
I can't really do.
Why don't we just watch that for the next hour? That would be great.
This one is more impressive. Like I got chills at the end of this.
What does it look like? A human wearing an animal?
Yeah. So I don't know if you were there, but I was asking, why does the tapir look like a chimera, or either a chimera or someone cosplaying to be a tapir?
Well, is it? I think it's in Thailand. I think in Thailand they do consider the tapir to have been made out of the pieces of the other animals that when the animals were being made. They have a folktale about it being made out of pieces of other animal. So that would explain it looking like a chimera.
Huh. So I was a bit close.
We can go. You'd be surprised. As a consequence of having done this project, I do have some trivia power on the topic of tapirs.
Yeah, I saw you actually have FAQ about tapir.
Yeah, there's hidden away there are tapir notes as part of this project. There's quite a lot going on.
Yeah, that was really cool.
And we can spend a little bit of nerd effort or looking on some of there were some technical issues to this which got a little bigger than I expected. So well, we have plenty to play with, I think, about this. So where do you want to start? I guess we have to say, if anyone hasn't seen this before, are we in a spoiler zone? It's okay that we talk about the ending, right?
Okay to talk about
I think it's pointless if we can't, because it's kind of the whole trick of this is the ending, right? That is the point.
I actually haven't watched it.
Oh, well, great. We're going to ruin it for you then, I think. So, right. Yes. What would you like me to tell you about it?
Well, the thing is, it is going to be spoiled. So yeah, spoiler alert. This comic is you can autoplay it. So like I think what Chidong you did just now is you kind of click next to see. But you can kind of let, it's pretty cool. You can let this just happen. But I think, Dave, you allow this comic to be interacted with in both ways, right? Like,
yeah, to start with, there was not an autoplay. And the idea was that you would click on it, and the reason for that is so there's a thing we should get out of the way very early on, is that the point about this comic, and comic it's kind of a sucker punch. There is an agenda to it, which is about the fact that this particular kind of tapir, the woolly mountain tapir, although in fact all tapirs, is very endangered, and so this is really the project is about extinction, and so my involvement in it is because I'm interested in doing storytelling where the interface is part of the experience. And in this case, the point is that the pictures get smaller and smaller as you go through the story. So the idea is you don't notice it to start with, but as you go through it, the interface is actually getting harder and harder to click on. But it turns out this is actually a bit painful for real users, and there's the real thing which you know from Civic Tech about the funnel of people dropping out if you give them if they set out on a task, and the frustration you give them completing that task starts to compete with the enthusiasm with which they want to get to the end, you lose them, right? And this is a user interface design concept. So the reason I added the autoplay is because quite quickly it became clear that it was getting tedious to just keep clicking. Even if you're interested in the story, you're clicking a button more often than you're actually turning a page when you're reading a book. So the autoplay turned into a gift for that. But you'll notice it stops at each chapter, and one of the reasons for that is to stop it becoming a film. I don't want you to get through it without interaction. So there's it's subtle in that respect, that it has this step through with it. So that's kind of why the autoplay existed. It was to overcome the user tested experience that it was actually becoming tedious. So, which is not tedium and entertainment are kind of opposite ends of the scale, I think. So that was and there's another thing about it, which was that by definition, although you don't realize it when you start it, the illustrations are by definition very boring. There is only one drawing in the whole thing, and that is the tapir in his enclosure. And so the other problem with this is that by definition I'm telling a story. Well, almost everything about it turns out to be a trick, because it's not really a comic, because in the sense that there's nothing comedic about it. It's got an agenda which you never signed up for, which is to be made miserable about the concept of extinction. The drawings aren't actually interesting, because by definition they're all the same thing. Nothing happens because he can't get out of the enclosure. So that everything, and in fact, there's no story, right? The whole thing is a terrible trick on the reader. But that's kind of what makes it interesting as a media experience, and it's actually been relatively well received, particularly by people who care about tapirs, because it's addressing this issue about extinction. And the thing that is, I'm going through the whole thing. This is quite an overview, and maybe we'll have a look at some of the detail in a bit, because a key thing, a thing that was very important to me is that you go on and you start to realize that the story is getting, the frame, everything is getting smaller, and you don't notice it to start with, but there is, or maybe I don't expect you to notice it to start with, but there is a percentage countdown going on, and we're very used to percentages showing us progress, but this one's going the other way, and you don't really notice it, and the percentage hides itself as part of the interface. But the point is that by the end, by the time you get to the end where the pictures have got so small you are just confronting a blank screen, that 0% removes any ambiguity that you've got to the end. And here's the point. I'm confident that everybody tries to click on that space. They click on that space to make something happen. And that is the storytelling here, is that this is what extinction is. Extinction is the idea that actually, no, that's not it. No, that really is it. And nothing happens. It's not that there is some crescendo and then there is the end. And this comes into this fascinating business about the word endling, the end, the last individual of a species, that we are going to see more and more endling tourism, because by definition, the last one of the species will increasingly be one in a zoo because it's the last one we know about. And when that happens, that's the thing that you go and look at because you're going to be the last people to see it. So the idea that the ending of a thing is itself going to become a use of spectacle, which is really problematic because we need that spectacle to be before you've got down to the last one of the species. So anyway, that is all about this trick about getting you to click in a futile way on a black screen. And every time that's happened, I'm not tracking it, so I don't know. I haven't even got Google Analytics on it because obviously I'm coming from a civic tech point of view. I'm also sensitive to the privacy issues as well. So I'm not tracking, but it would be lovely to know that everybody clicks at least twice on the end there just to try and make something to happen because you want it to happen, but it's not going to happen. And that is the point.
Yeah.
So that's that.
Yeah, I definitely clicked twice, and when I read your FAQ, I'm like, okay, I understand.
Yeah, you fell for it. You maybe you fell for it as well, but and it's heartbreaking because the reason that it's particularly fun that I'm talking to you guys is because Malaysia actually might be pulling this a little back a bit because it seems to be becoming popular as a national animal again, right? So there might be in terms of the prospects, it's maybe looking a little bit better for the Southeast Asian tapir than it is the one that I've picked on here, the woolly mountain tapir. There realistically, it doesn't look at all good. So it's an interesting thing. Because it's an interesting thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's also a bit of a trend.
Yeah. But for you guys, you haven't seen the story, right? Maybe I
clicked through very fast.
I can't stop myself from laughing.
Why?
Because it looks so.
Yeah, well, of course that is the trick. The reason, the awful truth about why I drew this in the first place goes back 25 years or so when I drew, because the woolly mountain tapir is such a funny looking animal because it's got a white mouth, so it's brilliant for cartooning because it's kind of got this lovely face and expressive. The shape of the face is distinct, so it's already kind of a bit funny. And then it's just like a cartoonist dream. So I thought, this is great. And I thought, and then it's got this extra thing. This extra aspect is that they're very rare. Yeah, okay, that's fine. And then the more I looked into it, I thought, okay, this is interesting. But you're exactly right. It starts as its appeal is as a cartoon. And it's outrageous that it's a sucker punch that I draw you. It's a bait and switch, isn't it? Here, this funny looking animal. And you realize it's one of the least funny animal cartoons that you might have had to spend, I don't know, it takes about 20 minutes, 15 minutes to get through, and you think, blimey, I feel cheated. Well, good.
Unfortunately, that's animal, right? That's cute animal is about. In the wild, they're probably extinct somewhere.
So they're actually even cuter than this because one of the great things about tapirs is that all baby tapirs are unbelievably cute. And this is relevant because the panda is a disgraceful, pointless animal. I know, because it isn't a significant part of any ecosystem, but the tapir so badly is. And the tragedy about it is the reason that the panda is so well known and it became the World Wildlife Fund's symbol. Of course, it's because it is cute, right? There's no doubt about it. But the sad thing is it's cute and pointless. Whereas the tapir, it could have been cute and purposeful. And in a very coarse way, the purpose of the tapir is that in Central America, it's the biggest shitter. There are seeds now, there are some plants which are only transferred through tapirs because they're too big for any other animal. And that has implications for reforestation. Whereas, frankly, if the pandas go, I'm not encouraging panda hunting. That's not what I'm saying. But a world without pandas would be very similar to a world with pandas. That is not the case with tapir. So that's the point. And of course, you know that is relevant in the,
at least tapir is trying to be alive.
Yeah, well, yes, that's it. Yeah, the sex lives of tapirs is quite impressive, actually, unlike pandas. Yeah,
compared to panda.
But of course, that's relevant. You're familiar with the territory issues and palm oil is a big issue because that is one of the aspects of it has now become a conservation icon in Malaysia, right? So it's good in that way. That has happened. That hasn't really happened, as far as I'm aware, on the same scale in the Americas, and it might be because your tapir is very distinctive as well, because it's a remarkable black and white animal, whereas the other species of tapir are not. Have you seen them in the wild?
No.
There was
so.
There was an amazing sighting a few years ago of one of your tapirs had swum across to Singapore. Did you see that? There was a story about a tapir in Singapore. It wasn't a happy tapir because things have gone badly. Right? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being in Singapore, but if you're a tapir, that's not really where you want to end up. But it swum across, they reckon. But presumably they're fairly easy to see in zoos.
It's actually very common, and it's actually being bred in a way. There is a breeding program. So not too long ago, the forestry department actually published a few cute babies in the process. So which is actually cool. And so there's some awareness between it. I still think it's underrated as a mascot of conservation, but it's getting there. Do
you think it's often the tiger?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Do you think it's true to say that if you showed any Malaysian child a tapir, they'd know what it is?
Yes.
Right.
Definitely.
So you are ahead of the world there, because people here, they point to them in zoos and say anteater.
Oh yeah. I showed a friend from the UK, and he said that's an aardvark.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
People are very surprised to discover that they're really most closely related to horses. They're actually untoed ungulates. And the other great thing about that is that they're 20 million years or more old, and horses are about 7. So tapirs, it's really sad what we're doing to them, because I think it's clear it's what we're doing to them, because they have been so evolutionary successful. They thought they had everything under control, and all they asked for is to be left alone. Well, that's not going to happen. So it's a bit sad. So, So, and this goes. The original cartoon was drawn about 25 years ago for New Scientist magazine, because New Scientist. I was freelancing as a cartoonist at the time, and the New Scientist magazine was appealing for a new cartoon. They had been running Albert the Experimental Rat by a very accomplished cartoonist called David Austin, and when it reached its end, they invited people to tender a story. So I drew this. Woolly mountain tapir, having discovered it presumably in a library book. You young people have no idea, but that in the olden days, if you wanted to see an animal to draw it, you didn't go on. Basically you had to walk to the library and get the book out, and I drew it and sent it in, and of course my pitch got rejected, of course, which is the nature of cartooning. You do lots of commissions that don't get in. And I kind of sat on it for 25 years. And in that time, the web had happened, and I'd done other online stuff with Interface. And this idea of pictures getting smaller and smaller and smaller, they make so much more sense if you do it online, where you are expected to interact with, or you are expecting to interact with them. So the idea that you click on the picture to get something to happen, I thought, okay, that felt like, this will this means that the idea of making the thing smaller and smaller will work better. And then it became clear, yeah, actually this works as part of the interface as well. So then the plan was born. And to do that, then the thing that I haven't mentioned that we absolutely have to mention is World Tapir Day. Because World Tapir Day, Sui-Meng, I'm sure you can tell me when World Tapir Day is. You celebrate it every year, right? By dressing up in your tapir cosplay? He's denying it. So World Tapir Day, it turns out, is the 27th of April every year. And because it existed, the consequence of doing my research, because these days research is inevitably going to be on the web, right? I'd realized World Tapir Day existed and thought, well, if I'm going to do this project, the obvious day to launch it is on World Tapir Day, because it is about awareness of the issues of extinction, whatever. And of course, it turns out World Tapir Day is just phenomenal, because that's where anyone who cares about tapirs sooner or later hangs out on the web in a way that 20 years ago wouldn't have been possible. The idea that all it is the seed of a crystal. And of course, because we have this overlap in civic tech, it's kind of relevant that if you have people, if you give people somewhere that they can coalesce, exactly like crystals being seeded, I guess, it turns out, I don't think it's going to break any too many secrets to say World Tapir Day is fundamentally a couple of people. And they've done an amazing job, because now, every year, any zoo that's got a tapir will be doing something on the 27th of April, especially on tapirs. And if these two people hadn't set up World Tapir Day online, that wouldn't be happening. And it's got bigger every year. It's been phenomenal to watch. That is one of the consequences of the web, and search engines, the two technologies combined, the fact that even if you are in a minority thing, you can find other people. And so it's been great to be associated with that. I'm in no way involved with World Tapir Day other than an enthusiastic tapir advocate. And I think if it is just another thing which helps drive people to care about it, and for most people, the only difference it makes is they start to feel guilty about palm oil. And maybe the orangutan is already doing that, but I think the tapirs are another factor now. So it's adding to the understanding that maybe our most significant power is as consumers. And so this is all about the idea that you can stumble upon something like this one way or another and end up at a World Tapir Day advocacy website. That's quite a thing that wasn't possible 10, 20 years ago.
Correct. So technology is awesome for this reason. So Wendy, what do you want to say?
No, I'm just saying, like, maybe your comic not being picked up is a good precursor to the form that your comic is taking today, which, like you say, can have some interaction that you would never have in a 2D paper printed format.
Yep.
Yeah, and to date, it is the only comic I've seen that features a tapir. I can't think of any other comic that has a tapir.
Well, it's worth a shout out. There are books, the very good Bam Bang and Mango. There's an excellent series of children's books featuring a Southeast Asian tapir, which is excellent. But and they do turn up in Far Cry, and you can shoot them and make bags out of them, which is shocking. But I think there is a Pokemon that is a bit tapir-like, isn't it? Because the Japanese have Baku, which are tapir-like, and in Japan they are dream eaters. So I have a feeling that is why there is a tapir Pokemon. But let's get more tapirs out there. You're right. We need more interactive tapirs. Yes. Yeah. Not least because they are themselves interactive, because there aren't that many animals with prehensile snouts. So the fact that they can pick stuff up with they could interact easily with a iPad or something like that, a tablet, because they have noses, articulate noses.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned in the beginning that you wanted it so that the interface is part of the experience. And I think this is really the same reason that's being faced by theater and live production. They want to, it's a digital world. Everyone just gets things digitally. They have a screen and watches it. So there's really, like, if you want to watch a movie, you can do it at home. And so live production or theater, they are looking for ways to make the experience part of the part of
Yeah.
the thing that you want to go to.
So that is a super interesting thing to say, because at the university where I work, they actually have a hub called Story Futures, where they're focusing on immersive and both augmented and virtual reality in terms of storytelling. And they're not interested in this at all. And I think they're missing a point there, because actually it's just another aspect of interface. And I've been doing this for quite a long time, because going right back to 1995, I did an online comic, which was the first one in the UK, but it was using a thing which you are all very familiar with now, which is image maps. The idea that you click on a picture and get a different result. But actually it was quite radical at the time, and I hadn't seen anybody really exploiting it. It turns out there were Argon Zark over in America was doing it as well. But so I ran this online comic for a story for 6 months in the UK in weekly installments, where when you click on the picture, you got a different thing. So it meant that you investigated the scene yourself. Whereas if you're reading a book, generally, even a graphic novel, the artist is largely presenting the order in which you're consuming the story. Whereas the idea on this was, given a scene, you would investigate the scene yourself. And this thing, well, it was radical at the time, and worked quite well. In those days, because we're nerds, the image map was server-side. So when you clicked, the XY coordinate of where you clicked on the image was sent back to a Perl script, which then calculated the link to send you. And the interesting thing about that is it meant that as a user, you could not see where the clickable hotspots were. Whereas now, actually, you can investigate it in the browser because it's all client-side. I don't think server-side maps are even necessarily supported in all browsers anymore. So anyway, so I did that back in 95 and got work on the strength of it to do a more complicated interactive story, which this time I did Planetarium, which is also on my website. And that also has the idea of time in it, where it prevents you moving through the story faster than the weekly installments and so on and so on. So, and then later I've done other stuff with that, with the interface. And one of them is, I did a short story called the Septima Bala, where, in fact, can we have a look at that? Shall I share screen? Can I risk sharing a screen with you? Is that going to be okay? I don't know that the...
I think Chi Leong is going to prepare sharing it. It's just that he hasn't enabled his mic when he was speaking.
Okay, I'll call him out on that.
Preparing
No, it's fine.
Are you happy for me to share? It was a courtesy thing as well. I'm going to click the button. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, right, here we go.
Okay.
Okay, what am I doing? I'm going to do... Here we go. Right. Right. Yeah. Let me see. Did that work? I think it did work.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right. So I'm going to slide. There we go. So let me just set this up. So, right. Another thing here on the website is Septima Bala. Right. Now, this is a story that I did with my Mexican collaborator. And I'm not going to make you go through the story. Don't worry. The idea about this is that to progress to the next part of the story, you have to click on things, and there's a little bit of animation, and then when it's gone, it moves on to the next scene, right? So this is fine, and there's a story, and you read it, and then when you get finished, there's another scene, and you've got to click on things, and this time I'm clicking on 3 things, right, to get onto the next scene. Okay, now ideally I'd want you to read this a bit more. The idea is you're not supposed to jump through the pictures, but you read, and so okay, so far so good. And then when it's finished doing its thing, sorry, that was a bit slow, it goes to the next scene. Right, and then, of course, I'm about to make a point. And so on this scene, if I don't know what to click on, there's a bit of UI help. It will show me what to click on. I click there to find out, okay? But in general, you click on things. Okay, and now I go to the next scene. But you might have noticed what's going on here. The first one had 2, the next one 3, the next one 4. So there's a really subtle bit of user training going on here. This is me using an interface as storytelling. And then this next scene has got 5 on it and so on. And the reason for this, there's a spoiler coming up, of course, is that in the story is about a girl who can shoot 7 cans off a rail with 6 bullets. And when you get to that scene, you have been taught to expect you're going to have to click 6 times to get rid of the 6 cans. And when you click once, they all go. So the interface behaves in an unexpected way. And the only way you can do that is because I'd set the interface to set up in this user trainee kind of predictable way first. And so that the storytelling, the sensation that the behavior of the interface creates in you is the same sensation that that a character in the story is experiencing. And it's a tiny thing, but it was an interesting experiment. That was what I was up to with that. And so you can see that in that respect, Dwindle is less sophisticated in that respect. I think there's a lot more tech in it, but it's less sophisticated in what it's actually doing.
I saw both stories, and I was like first struck by how different they are. As in, one is purely you interact with the picture, and the other one you read the story, and then you have prompts to click on it. But for both, I feel like by the time you invest your time towards the end of the story, you've kind of have an attachment with the story, so that your feelings towards the story itself.
I think you're right, because the other big one that I mentioned already, Planetarium, the other project I did, Planetarium has the idea where it has puzzles in it, which you don't have to complete, but you can do. So you can interact with it because you can store a response. So if if you discover a puzzle or a question, you can store your answer, and it doesn't affect your progress through the story. But because it's in weekly installments, what I now know, this has been running for a long time, it's been running since 1999, it's still running, is there is a sense of engagement that is not the same as if you sit down and read a book in one sitting, because it has this idea that it's in some tiny way personalized, and in that case, the story is deliberately about time and memory. So the idea about making you read it slowly is part of it. But there's technology in that as well, which is that when somebody encounters that story, they can see the first chapter. But when they try and read more, it says, okay, let's come back in a week's time. And the idea that that the story starts for you the moment you register, I don't understand why I don't see that happening more and more, because the technology definitely supports it. And it's another way of making a story potentially more interactive. I mean, I'm doing it in Planetarium. I do very little with it. I don't interfere with past events. So when you go back and look at the previous installments, they haven't changed. But that's definitely something which we'll be investigating in one of the future projects, I think. So all of these things are the fact that you can change the reader's relationship with the story through the technology you're using. So it's specifically the interface that you're using to present the story, right?
Because a lot of the comics, like for Dilbert or any of those things, it's the same funnies that we have on the papers, just you just see it on the screen. And
it's funny you should mention Dilbert, because when Concuspidor, when I did the project in 1995, Dilbert was one of the very first on the web. And I did, in fact, exchange email with Scott Adams, as it was. But it was clear that most of the online comics in about then 95 really were just using the web as distribution. The only thing that was different about it as a medium was the distribution. There was another tiny thing which you young people would find very hard to believe. But actually, in the olden days, color was very expensive. So actually, it was one of the reasons that comics were black and white, is because photocopying in color was prohibitively expensive. And the web changed that, because it meant you could distribute things in color where previously you wouldn't have been able to afford to. So there's another subtle thing happened, that not only was distribution happening, but actually things were color. And you can imagine syndicated cartoons that were black and white in the paper were color online, because that cost was a prohibitive factor. Color was a prohibitively expensive factor in small press anyway. So yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it, how so much of the early comics were, as is always the case with new technology, was the simulation of the existing technology rather than a change.
Yeah, very, very few people are actually experimenting like the way you have. So I didn't know about your projects before, but the only one the thing that reminded me was like XKCD, the click and drag from like many years ago. Like because he used to just do black and white, and then wow, this is interactive. This is a different way of telling the story, and it's about floating and trying to explore, and you're exactly exploring the thing with cue ball.
Of course, it's very flattering to be mentioned in the same context of that, because the whole thing about XKCD and Randall Schwartz is that by definition, his thing is not about the artwork, right? And that's what's so clever about it, because each time that you visit it, the boundaries are, you have no idea where it's going to go. And some of them, as you know, some of them have been extreme because he has the capabilities of boundless nerdydom, right? So he can go anywhere with that. The only thing that he's not doing is look at this brilliant drawing, because that's not what it's about. I'm also, for what it's worth, I have a lot of time for dinosaur comics as well, because he went the other way. He said, what if we don't change anything, right? Of course, and unsurprisingly, he's a genius writer as well, and that is why he can do it, because if you don't change the pictures, you better be able to be good at what you're doing. And it turns out not only is he good at what he's doing, that's why his Kickstarter projects were great, because maybe it helps to be a nerd, right? But yeah, so really interesting that XKCD is a great example where he has used the possibilities of interface and the fact that he is in that medium just superbly. It's brilliant, yeah.
So what would you advise us? Because we're in the technology, we create things, and we're in the business of designing user experiences, whether it's through the programs that we write or the designs that we create. Like, how do we change what we think about so that we can like step out of the box, give better experiences to our users?
Well, so one of my heroes, I know that some people who know me will mock me for this, but one of my heroes is Ted Nelson, who coined the term hypertext. And he is nowhere near as well known as he deserves to be in terms of the influence he ought to have had. It turns out our computing world has not been shaped by Ted Nelson, and there are a number of reasons for that. But one of the things that he was very lots of people won't have heard of him, right? So the context of it for me was his book, Computer Lib. Computer Lib, you can and must understand computers now. And he wrote this book in the late 70s, which is a radical thing already. And it was a handmade, made up little book. And just, he was a visionary with opinions about this. And where he says, he has this beautiful idea that if you are writing with a brick tied to the end of your pencil, let's say a pencil, if that is how you write, and I come along and remove that brick, would it change what you write? And it's such a good and profound question, saying, does the tool change what you actually create? And his example, he of course, it's a rhetorical question, and he believes it does. And the example he gives of that is that when a civilization is carving on stone, and it's using straight edged letters, when papyrus comes along, you can write cursively, and we start to find shopping lists in the archaeological record where you couldn't have done that before because it was too much effort. So he's thinking similarly when he says, when the digital computer comes, which he saw happening in Xerox PARC, and he was talking about this from the 60s onwards, when digital comes, we can stop simulating paper. That was his excitement. And the heartbreak is we didn't. And he was infuriated about it then. I believe he's infuriated about it now. And he talks particularly about how the GUI that we use, the graphical user interface, Windows and the Mac, were fundamentally developed in Xerox PARC, which was a photocopying company. And he provocatively suggests that the reason that the metaphor is all paper is because the only way you could get anything signed off was to convince a manager who'd been working in a photocopy company that this was going to work. So the paper-based thing. And it just takes a few of these things to jolt you out to realize that what you're so used to. The first one is, he says, why are all the icons on your desktop the same size? Why is that? Surely the most recent one should be nearer to you, right? It should be bigger. Why isn't that happening? The next thing is your brain is geared up. Where's all your work stuff? Why isn't the work stuff over there when all your play stuff's there? In your life, you've arranged everything spatially. Our brains are set out for that. But for some reason, your desktop is a flat space And it's even called a desktop. Why is it a desktop? It's not a desktop. It doesn't look like a desk. What's this about? And he rants about these kind of things. But anyway, I think it's very instructional to force you to change the way you view what is available to you. Now, you've seen I've done it with, I'm only ever claiming to have done this in tiny ways, and I've done it with interface. One of my arguments is I did it quite early on, and I'm disappointed to watch it not getting better. It's changing a lot. And in fact, the place you want to look, of course, is video games, where, and Ted Nelson wrote this in the 70s. He said, if you want to know why games are better than Office software, if you want to know why Office software is so bad, he didn't mean Microsoft Office, he meant all Office software. It's because the people who write Office software at the end of the day go home and play games, whereas the people who write games at the end of the day go and play games, right? So now I'm excited about Cyberpunk 2077, not because I'm a games player, but because in the gameplay that I've watched of it, the vending machines in that have better interfaces than the vending machines in real life. And I'm interested in interacting with machines that are not going to make me angry. So just look at the games people. The idea that when I'm using a spreadsheet, when I'm using my email client, our email clients are a disgrace. Why aren't they as fluid and likable as games interfaces? Because it's the same computer. I know it's possible. Why isn't that happening? And it's just so sad that almost all the applications that we're using are fundamentally square interfaces onto databases. They could only have been designed by nerds, and we ought to be ashamed of ourselves as nerds.
Well, we do have a change for communication software. It's called a chat room.
Well, I think one of the things which might break it is the excitement, particularly now people are working at home. The excitement of it might. I'm not a big fan of virtual reality, but it might be that that's what it takes for people to break out of the idea that we have to have planar rectangular interfaces. I think that might happen. But, so, in question, what we should do, I then pull back a bit and say, come on, realistically, Dave, how does that help us when we're putting another website together? Particularly, the great thing about Civic Tech, this idea where you have users who you must do nothing to dissuade. So we always used to say, if you've got a website that's selling, I don't know, what should we say, ice cream, and somebody wants ice cream badly enough, this used to be Amazon. If you're selling books and somebody wants that book badly enough, even if the interface is rubbish, they're going to punch through because the end result is the book. But as soon as you've got something which we talked about before, like Civic Tech, where you're trying to encourage people to do something which deep down they might not really want to do, they've got better things to be doing, the interface then becomes the trick. So part of that, given that we've got the constraint, which is much less of a constraint now of a web browser, because the capabilities on browsers now are becoming almost as powerful as well, they are as powerful as games programmers would have had at their disposal on the early consoles, right? So I would, at this point, I would call out the senior developer at my society, Louise. She once said, interface can be joyful. So why doesn't that button do something beautiful and unexpected when you click on it? I mean, it's progressive enhancement. You don't change anything, you build your site first. But why doesn't the button do something? Really good example, the brewery local to me, where, because I'm in lockdown, I have to have my beer delivered, right? And then it turns out this brewery has had the genius idea of doing free delivery. Well, when you go onto their shop, when you click on the beer that you want, it says cheers. Right, a little bubble comes up and it says cheers. Right, now it's a tiny detail. We know from an interface point of view, it's just Chrome onto. I mean, you know, not the browser, but it's just show. It's not part of the interface, but it is a key part of the interface there. That is why isn't the interface joyful? I did some accountancy software years ago where every button behaved differently in an unexpected way. It was VBA. When you clicked on it, it exploded in some unexpected way. It's just weird that we're not seeing more of that. It can be very annoying when a thing's not working, but in general, if you've got a website, if somebody's bought a product, why isn't your button delighting them? So okay, yeah. I think, and of course, yes, there'll be lots of people who are doing it well, and I think the games are great at doing it. In fact, the trouble with games is they've got so good at doing it now that we've got problems with things like loot boxes and stuff, where they become actually that delight has become compulsive, right? So yeah, okay.
Become addiction.
Yeah.
Because there's so much like endorphins just by doing those, clicking those buttons, that it becomes addictive.
So I think, and I'm also very cynical about gamification for its own right. And that's because I'm inherently opposed to competition. If I see somebody trying to enthuse me with competition, I will immediately disengage, because that's not how my mind works at all. I mean, I see competition as an opportunity to chalk up yet another loss, and I just don't need that in my life. So, so it doesn't work for me. I think not everybody is the same. Not everyone is as old as bitter as me. But
yeah. Speaking of like getting away from paper-based, I think Apple came under fire for doing too much skeuomorphism, right? Like trying to emulate day-to-day things that, but doing it in the context of a phone. Like, oh, my phone is a music player, so it looks like an old school 80s radio with like dials and those things.
And we have that this brilliant situation now that we're using Teams at the university, Microsoft Teams, and it's bizarrely its symbol for a call is a telephone receiver, a headset receiver, which increasingly I don't think young people have ever seen. Right, and then to make that matters even more bizarre, to end a call you have to click on an icon which shows it being put down, which is a really analog thing. Oh, what's that about? And of course, the other famous one would be the floppy disk save icon now, which
save icon,
you young people see. If I carry a floppy disk around, you think I 3D printed off the save icon, and that's.
I just
we also
glad that our ID are not dialed. That would be so interesting.
Yes.
Imagine a JavaScript dial to send your ID so that you can call the other person. That would be so funny. We should do that.
So I think that's sometimes the convenience of it is because it is a convention, right? So everyone has agreed what this means, right? And the idea that a cross closes a window, that is abstract, but we've got used to that. So of course it's generally working and you stay safe. But I think from a creative point of view, these things are problematic.
Yeah, but creativity is also risky because it's something that's new, and it's something that's not conventional. So you can't please everyone with something new. I think most risk-averse designers will just fall back to.
I think for some of people that build system like us, is that we tend to get short-sighted, like just get reactive with whatever to deliver and didn't think too much about that. Like,
but of course, there's another side to this, which is that it's okay to keep going on about civic tech because that is a common ground that some of us have. But there's a great example where you cannot afford to spend all your time making the interface beautiful because the actual core thing is getting the site to work. And of course, one consequence of that is things like Bootstrap or maybe Foundation, which I've used a bit more. They produce totally functional, totally conventional. These are what buttons are like, this, so that you don't have to spend any time about it, but you get a clean interface. And there is space for that in the world. I do understand that. I don't want everything to be. What would be nice would be the option maybe to have subtle enhancement to interfaces that just bring joy, maybe on your second visit, things like that. Don't interfere with the. I don't know. I think we could see a lot more of this, and maybe we will when it gets easier. Because right now, anything with animation on the web is still very hard, and I find that fascinating because that is one of Ted Nelson's points: is that if you've got a diagram which has anything temporal in it, if you're trying to show any change of something changing over time. The only reason a diagram isn't animated is because we're simulating paper, because we didn't used to be able to do it. But now we should be able to. But it turns out it's actually, it's still not easy to drive these tools. I have some experience of it, and I still find it difficult. I was just to do even the animation on Dwindle, because there's another thing. Okay, while we're doing this, the other technical thing to look at on Dwindle, I don't know if you tried this, Wendy, but if you, it degrades gracefully. If you kill JavaScript, this story still works, but in a different way. And that was a deliberate and provocative thing to do, right? Because so what happens for the nerds. What really happens is the whole story is there as a single web page, and when it comes, it's a big hit. It is a fat project as a single page. But what actually happens, the JavaScript then hides everything, and then shows it to you in the way that it does. So if you've disabled JavaScript, you get the whole story, with one very significant difference, is that the crows are SVG cutouts. They're clip paths that are being animated with expanding black circles with GreenSock as the animation library. So if you've got no JavaScript, you've got no crows. But actually, that's kind of in the story, is that it's not obvious that those crows are there. And the whole thing, it really could be in the mind of the tapir, because the story has this awful problem that the tapir thinks that he's doing something to be remembered for posterity, but it's futile. And the crow's just bringing him rubbish. And at some point you begin to wonder, maybe the crow's not being entirely honest with maybe the crow's just having a bit of a laugh. And you get that across because it's in some of the dialogue. But if you look at it with JavaScript disabled, you're seeing the whole thing. There are no crows. I didn't draw any crows. So I kind of delight in the idea that this has another depth to it if you look at it in the extinct technology.
My mind is blown right now. There are 3 different ways to experience this story.
Yeah.
Lots of different ways.
Yeah.
Look on like just a text-only browser, you can still actually experience it in as if it's a screenplay of sorts. Yep. So it's actually quite interesting.
So let's be more outrageous about that. Is that the other thing about this project, which is a little bit unique, is that because people do care about tapirs, I'm very touched that this has been translated into several languages, and that is a volunteer effort. And that works. The way I've done it, you'll see, because each one is a separate URL, that works as well. And the relevance of that is it means that the search engines are seeing it all. Right. And that is the SEO on this matters, because the whole point is about making people find out about tapirs. So I rarely talk like this, because normally you don't find a bunch of nerds who are interested in a cartoon about tapirs. But it's a bit sad that this kind of thing is not a consideration for most projects like this at all. But this is it's a bit overkill, because the SEO on this and the fact that it gracefully degrades. Some of these, of course, are lessons from Civic Tech, but it's relevant here as well. And it's art. It's very definitely art. So
it just because people are doing it, is it just because it's difficult to do? The benefits does not outweigh the cost of spending time to do this, or people are just aware?
That's a really good question. I think generally most people are unaware. I think most people don't realize SEO. We know it from a Civic Tech point of view, because, as Kyril said in when you were talking to him, is that everybody's engagement with anything these days starts with Professor Google. It's really depressing, but that is the way it is. So your brand starts on Google if you're not on page 1. So so in that respect, maybe SEO is part of it, but it's horrible because there's algorithms in this, right? So when palm oil wants to get tapirs off the agenda, they can just pay to move so that nobody finds them, right? But meanwhile, getting the SEO is right. I would say that the Dwindle was a big project. It did take me it was like all these things. It was harder than I thought it was going to be. Funnily enough, that autoplay, where when you click on it, you're not expecting to be invited to choose how fast the story is going to play back to you, but it affects, because you're reading it, affects how long you've got to read the speech bubbles, right? So when you bring that up, the most complicated part of Dwindle was the interface, and I've probably done it in an awful way, for the slider that lets you control how fast it is. Because as you slide it, the control speeds up to demonstrate. I've got to indicate to you that this is about the speed of something, but until you've started on the story, you don't understand what speed you're being invited to choose. I think there might be better ways of doing that. So, and that turned out to be, it's got draggable. It responds to the arrow keys as well if you need to, and that turned out to be proper UI programming. It was difficult. That wasn't an off-the-shelf component. Let's put it that way. There's another thing that I want to mention, because I think it will interest you, about the translations. which is that the other thing that is unique about this was that this was the first time that I put my handwriting out as a font on the web. So it's I made my handwriting into a font in very early on, something like 1990. I paid money, sent it off, and got a floppy disk back with my handwriting on a font for a book project that I was working on. And TrueType fonts haven't changed that much, so it still works, which is amazing. But when I got the translations done, it didn't work because my font has no diacritics for the accents in European languages. So it turned out a fabulous friend, Claudia, has spent a lot of time, and she sorted the font out for me for all the translations, so they're now happening in my language, apart from Japanese, of course, because life's too short for me to do the handwriting for the font. But then an interesting thing, because as you know, the text comes up in speech bubbles, which is just CSS, right? And it turns out that CSS wraps text very well for Western languages. I think Malay would probably be cool with it as well, because you've got spaces between words. But Japanese doesn't wrap well, because it doesn't have this obvious word break. And the thing which was pointed out to me by my Japanese friend and subsequent Dwindle translator was it is culturally unacceptable to see bad line breaks in manga. You're used to it in running text in Japan, because there isn't a good text solution for breaking lines in running text. But in manga, there's always a human letterer that stops that happening. So it is unacceptable to see bad line breaks in speech bubbles, even if it's online. So in the end, the poor translator, I made her go through and indicate word breaks between every group of characters. And each one of those is wrapped in a non-breaking span, so that the CSS breaks the Japanese text in the right place. Lordy law, what an interesting journey that was.
The hard parts of internationalization.
Yes, absolutely. And I because I'm exposed to teaching university students web stuff now, it's one of the things that internationalization is massively overlooked about how subtle and complicated it is. And it's not because it's technically difficult, it's because it's really difficult in all kinds of unexpected ways. But that one was absolutely horrible because it was invisible to me. And the other thing on that was also getting the customizing the font to only have the characters, the Japanese characters that the Dwindle story required, was an interesting little challenge as well. We got it in the
Yeah.
There are one or two characters which aren't in the font that I'm using, which is a rather lovely Japanese cartoonist's font. But in general, we ended up with a pretty good job on it, but it was not easy.
Yeah, with internationalization, you'd think like getting a person's name is easy. You just ask for a name in the text box. But then you could run into some cultures don't have a last name. Some have three names. Some have like strange characters, and of course, like not the same scripts that you're used to. And you'll find out that just a name is just storing that name, and actually getting that attached to a person is like horrible.
And the classic thing in the computer science context is that when you convince students that they think they've understood this, you writing a hospital application, it is totally feasible to have a person record for somebody who doesn't have a name yet. So that fails most tests. This person can leave the hospital and still not be named.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, when I worked on police software here, they had the search box. This was when I first graduated. The search box on the surname had a requirement that needed at least 3 characters to search on. And so there's a well-known Chinese surname that was never going to be found. So I always used to think that the triads could come over here and get away with all kinds of crime because it was never going to be found because the police couldn't search for it.
So theoretically, I would literally able to get away from committing a crime.
Right.
And it's not your fault.
You're right. Yeah, committing the crime still is your fault, just to be clear. Yeah.
Well, maybe nothing too serious. Just stealing some
And then we'll discover that Swimming actually wrote the software.
Yes. It was in Pascal, if you want to admit to that.
Man, that's a long. I'm sorry, that's a long time ago.
Yes, it was 1989. So yeah. So
Yeah.
one other tiny detail about Dwindle, which is that if you look on the, can I just quickly screen share it again? Can I do that? Is that all right? Have you got a moment? If I do that again, share screen, gotta go bang, here we go. Right, one other little thing that I want to show you. Did that work, by the way?
Not
You
yet.
see me?
No. It
Oh,
didn't
okay,
show up.
hang on, sorry. I have used computers before. There we go. Share, make sure I share the right one. There we go. Okay, is that working now? Can you throw me up? Yeah, lovely. Right, so, if we go to, I've got a little thing called a scrapbook here, and in the scrapbook, I go to the scrapbook, and right at the bottom, if I go to the Dwindle, right. This was the first time that I'd also invested, because I knew I was going to have to draw the same picture again and again. I actually built the set in SketchUp. This was so that I could just casually, and briefly I experimented. Do you see this bottom one? Briefly I experimented with it being like this. And it didn't work, because it turns out I need this to be on paper and look archival, because that's another thing about the fact that it is this. If I made it too modern like this, it lost the idea of there's something old about it, which was also happening. So yeah, this is and that's how I came to the way that I did the artwork was actually with watercolors, which I scanned in and then dropped in behind it, so I got the texture as well. But my point about this was only that I had originally intended to, well, my line art was sketching over SketchUp, was tracing on a light box by hand over SketchUp, so that I could get lots of different views, because I knew I was going to draw lots of the views of the same thing. Life's too short. But also my investigation into doing it entirely digitally was no. So there you go. That was it.
Wow. Yeah, a lot of thought went into not just the storytelling part, but also like the look and feel of the story.
Yeah, because I think it's part of the charm. Another detail which you might have seen is that all the colors are desaturated, apart from when the tape has a little dream, where there's the little bit of childhood. There are some rainbow colors in there, which is as close as you get to there being any real happiness in the story. And although you don't notice it, the pictures don't start getting smaller until after that. And as soon as he wakes up from the dream, that's when the pictures start getting smaller as well.
It's almost as if you have to think about who's going to experience your creation,
I can't believe there's so
instead of
many
just
hidden
following.
details.
Yeah, no,
and
it's not. Yeah, it's not just like you following the boss doing whatever e-commerce core or whatever. You actually have to think about the end user and put this in, which I think takes a lot of work, takes a lot of effort, and maybe that's the reason why we don't have more of these. Like, we just want to make a living and then get a salary and follow directions.
yeah,
I
okay.
think it's hard to come up with like the whole mindset. Also, it's a skill. Storytelling is not something you can read a book and learn, I think.
I think to be fair, pretty much any artist at some point imagines what is the user, what is my reader, what is my audience's experience. So of course that kind of empathy happens. The thing that's unusual maybe is that I coming at it from this nerdy interface point of view a little more perhaps than might otherwise be the case. This is why to me it is not just another medium, which is a kind of interesting thing, right? That it shouldn't be. We've never had a more versatile canvas. A canvas is a problematic word already because it's not a canvas, right? But yeah.
But it's a bit more than that. But it is canvas, but it's a bit more. But despite that, can you imagine an artist that only talk about we have green cut, we have this color, and we have this canvas and this brush? Because technically, when we build website, this is what we're talking about.
Yes.
As an artist, we're talking about, I want you to see the smile of the Mona Lisa, the gaze,
and of course the study art history, and you realize that these things are well understood, of course, and maybe we should be teaching more art history to computer scientists.
Yes,
So,
because
that's an idea. I really think that people focus too much on the technical aspect when whatever technical thing that you do is actually for a human being. And I think that's what's important. The end result of what it is that you're creating is going to be consumed by another human being, not by another computer. And which is why interfaces are important, experiences are important.
And if you want to see what happens if you don't do that, Facebook and the world we're living in now, absolutely, is because of the complete absence of consideration of some of the what we would loosely call the humanities, from the consideration about what the machine they were building was going to do to the society it was spreading through. Absolutely, I think that the danger, because I self-identify as a nerd. I think but obviously at heart, I have an artist's heart in this nerd body. And inevitably, I'm going to say, well, that mix has to be a better way. The society needs everything, but we have to be very careful ever handing control to any single group of that. And particularly when we're seeing it now. It's fascinating how civic tech matters, right? Once you've been in civic tech, you never get out, right? Because particularly with systems like democracy, the influence over people's thought matters immensely as to the shape that society ends up going on. And we're talking about interfaces here in storytelling, but the classic example, as Kyrilakos mentions, there is not a great incentive for governments to make interfaces usable for things they don't want their population to be able to do. And this is storytelling is taking it the other way, right? If I want to guide you in this way, if I want you to have this sensation, I have this other dimension at my disposal, I think. God, and you thought it was just going to be about tapirs, right?
It's more than that. So do you know any websites who do this well?
Well,
go beyond.
I think from an art point of view, it's going to be
besides
a bit
Beholder.
Well, no, I don't think I'm doing it particularly well. That's the thing. I'm doing it in a very minimal way. There's an artist called James Bridle who's done some interesting stuff with automotive cars things, but he's somebody who plays with there is no limit to what he considers being art and tech. But I do think you're seeing a lot of this is happening as it should be in what we would loosely call games. And some of the more beautiful, thought-provoking games, which I'm actually not a strong gamer, but I keep an eye on it because that is clearly where this world is going. And things like Journey, I think, was really popular, that it was playing with this idea. The idea of sensation rather than necessarily achievement is a really interesting thing. And I'm a big fan of Amanita, the independent Czech design studio who did Machinarium, a point-and-click adventure, and Samaros. They're beautiful, restful games. They've got a new one coming out, Creeks, coming out this month. So I think games is probably where people feel most able to play with this and develop it. And so I think the great things are probably happening in what we will loosely call games. But I think we're finding that game is not quite the right word. So in much the same way that comic is the right word for a graphic novel, I think we've got a similar thing going on with games now as well.
But have you played the last part of Nier Automata, for example? Because I think that was a really interesting one where, well, spoilers,
right.
you get to the end where it's a very, very difficult part of the game, and you get the option to ask for help from other people. And then once you finish the game, you're actually given a choice that you have to sacrifice your save game file to actually give someone the help that you just got from before. And it reminds you don't know who this person is. It can be your enemy, your neighbor, or like someone you like, but you don't know. Will you sacrifice your game file? And that it
Brilliant.
Actually summarizes the whole game itself. Like it's about sacrifice and about without really knowing what's going to end up. And so I feel that because games are in this area where they have to give an experience, they get to play around with all of these concepts too. Like it's not just playing the game, it's actually trying to make the hard decisions and trying to explore the different kinds of sensations the feelings, not just sensations, but emotions that you can feel about it. And so that I feel that like what you said about games trying to do this exploration, I think that is actually quite what's happening right now.
Yes, I was very lucky that I got to a talk by, rudely, I won't be able to remember the guy's name fast enough, but the guy who did Vader Immortal, which is the canonical Star Wars virtual reality game. And he gave an excellent talk about how it had been different from his experience of making movies and games. Because VR is different again, and the way that people want to interact, how you use the space, how eye contact works. It was super interesting because VR is the most obvious case because people know they're doing something new. So the reason we're going to see interesting things in there is because it is clearly a different palette. Whereas, sadly, because of web page and the rectangular nature and the canvas, there's so much encourages people to simulate print when they're still working on the web. The good thing about VR is that it's breaking people out of that. So yeah, I think there's
will we have a VR version of Dwindle's adventures?
I think well, there are no there are no Dwindle adventures. That's the tragedy of it, isn't it? Well, I think that would be I think Malaysia should do that with a Southeast Asian tapir. So I haven't touched the black and white tapir. I just went with the woolly mountain tapir that nobody knows. So I think you've got a project there. Over to you guys.
So make it a sad one though.
Well, unless I don't know what your numbers are. I don't know what you think the prognosis is for your nation's population of tapirs. I don't have any skin in this game because in the UK we don't have a population of tapirs.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, someone could come up with a story.
Well, I want to go back to the question I had when you were still backstage, like about.
I did a brief googling. We only had 1,000 to 2,500 of them.
Yeah.
Malayan tapir.
So
a lot more than the woolly tapir.
Well, we don't know because the other fascinating thing about this is that there's so much that's interesting about it. How do you know how many you got left? By definition, the woolly mountain tapir. One of the problems with tapirs is that they cover quite large territories because they're quite big, and the woolly mountain tapirs are by definition in territories that are very hard to get to. They are up in the Andes, live in their own little lives, minding their own little business, and so they're actually very hard to count. So the analysis of how many they've got is very, very arm wavy. And when the nature of, because they are slow breeders as well, 13 months gestation, single calf, generations are very slow. So if they fall below a critical level for maintaining the population, they could be gone quite quickly and we wouldn't know because they're already very scarce. There are great people doing tracking efforts, but the number for woolly mountain tapir is cited at around about 2,000, but that's a very, very guessy. I think your number is probably more accurate because they're probably more accurately known in and around Malaysia, not least because yours are easier to spot.
Partly because the forestry department have to release a lot of those back because Malaysian car keep hitting them. And some of them actually survive, so they have to go to the forestry department. Then they have to heal them. Then they send them back. So you will count them.
Yeah, and the other thing that's kind of fun about this is that, well, if you care about tapirs, that there is a controversial schism in the tapir community about whether or not there are 4 or 5 species. Because in 2013, a new species was declared. And it's fascinating, the Kabamani or little black tapir, and it's disputed whether or not it is a new species. But the reason that is interesting is because as nerds and our taxonomies and classifications, it's far from straightforward what we mean by species. So that is another aspect to this, which as people look into,
wasn't the definition of a species is that you cannot. I mean, you're a separate species, but you cannot procreate with another.
Well,
so-called different species, right?
It gets complicated because we've got tigers and lions and zebras and donkeys, and they have crossbred the different tapir species as well. So not too much. That's not relevant from a conservation point of view yet. But there comes a point when you say, "Are you willing to sacrifice species distinction in order to keep the taxonomy. The whole thing is fascinating, and this is, of course, it's not my field. I just have to draw a cartoon about it. But
it's the same issues in machine learning, right? Like classification and taxonomy.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's changed in my lifetime is that the search engines originally, you look at Alta Vista and Yahoo, they were working because they were taxonomies. They thought they would find all the things on the web, all the pages on the web, and put them in the right place for you. And Google absolutely found that for now, keyword and rank analysis is a smarter solution to this problem than taxonomy. But I think we are slowly discovering that has its own limitations. But yes, absolutely, it's fascinating that. And species, the natural world does not fit into this pattern automatically for us either. I think of course it's interesting. It's all interesting.
Yeah. So we were talking in the backstage before we started, and then we spilled over to live about your adventures as an Aikido practitioner and about
you were talking
all the other things.
I wasn't talking about it.
No. Well, we're interested in like how did you get into all of these things like martial arts and.
Well, the martial arts is easiest because when I was a teenager, I saw a poster that said "Learn the martial art James Bond does," and I thought, yeah, I'll do that. And it turned out that was my first lesson in marketing because obviously it was an outrageous lie, but I was hooked. I was quite nerdy, and so martial arts appealed to people who are a little bit nerdy, who aren't so good at the. I wanted to be a goalkeeper in football, soccer, obviously, but I was the shortest in my class till I was 16, so I was useless at it. So Aikido worked for me instead. And it turns out, I think in many respects, Aikido is the civic tech of the martial arts world because it tends to attract people who are trying to think about it more than they're actually want to be good at it. because Aikido is one of the least. It's the least likely martial art where you're going to get properly beaten up, I think. But it turns out it's a great way to travel and meet people because it's a bit of a niche activity. And as some of you know, I ended up being involved with the Thai Aikido group because there's an excellent teacher a Japanese teacher who's been there for almost about 50 years now, teaching Aikido. He was sent by the founder, so I ended up training under him, which was excellent.
Yeah. How far have you proceeded with the ladder in Aikido?
Well, that's very subjective. The answer that you want is that I wear a black belt. There you go. But actually, you can get those anywhere. So it turns out I'm not very good at it. I find it really interesting, but I'm not the right. I'm too tall. I'm a little too clumsy, but it's a fascinating thing. Yeah, and it's non-competitive, so part of it. Well, of course, right now we're not doing it because you can't do it in lockdown because you can't touch each other. It's a very tactile thing. It's a very artistic and tactile thing. So, yeah.
So we actually way past our hours.
Yep.
Okay, not that we have curfew.
And Wendy was worrying about having afraid to run out of questions or topic to talk about.
Yeah, because you do so many things.
Yeah, it never happened to us. We always overshoot.
Yeah, of course. It's interesting people to talk to. I don't suppose we ever didn't end up spending too long when we were meeting out in. When I was over there with you guys, I think we always ended up eating out and drinking later than we should have done.
So I guess we have to say goodbye to the audience, but don't leave the studio yet. So I'm going to end the broadcast, so don't leave.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. Sorry, abrupt ending, but we'll see you again next week.